After clearing multiple rounds, client round is the last hurdle before we get the offer. And often I have seen with my personal experience in client round, they don't go for, understanding your basics and all. That is already done in different technical rounds. Majority of the time, scenario-based questions are subjected to you and you have to explain in depth. And there are a lot of follow-ups. So this is also one of the question which I personally felt. If you're very much prepared for a client round, then you already start getting goosebump of getting the offer letter and, demanding this much of salary and so on. But if you are not, then you start getting nightmares. So I don't want you to be in a situation where you feel so nervous, disturbed, and afraid of, facing the client round. So this is the question which was asked to me during my very recent client round discussion. They gave me a scenario where what I had to do is to secure an endpoint with JWT in ASP network code. So the problem statement says we have a client or an Angular application. It sends a JWT with every request. Now, inside our ASP.NET Core Web API, we have certain endpoints. Specifically, he mentioned admin endpoint. And the request is simple. Only users with admin privileges should be able to access them. That's it. That was the whole problem statement. But when you start explaining, there was so much of follow-ups kept on coming, so that I thought of explaining everything in single go. Let's try and answer this confidently and cleanly, so that you don't fall into the trap of follow-up questions and you end up giving a wrong impression. So one of the things which I personally have been doing whenever I get a scenario to explain, I do a mental mapping. What I do is basically think like what the problem statement says and try to divide that problem statement in smaller steps. And for that, I often, request for some time. So can I take some time? So whatever. And if they allow, then what I do is like I split the problem statement in smaller part. If you look at the question again, what is this asking? How does the API validating the JWT? Whenever a client, how client is sending a JWT request and how API is validating that. And the next thing we have to, let's say, think in that way that how does it identify whether the user is an admin or not? I mean, we need to first look at the token, validate it, and also we have to see that claim of that user being an admin is correct or not, right? So we have to apply the same logic throughout any endpoint. If you can explain them cleanly for one endpoint, you're done. You can explain for any follow-up question in between as well. So let's understand how you manage this kind of sort of scenario. Now, but before we start, one of the few things which I have observed in almost all the interviews, whether I have passed or failed, that if you start, if you immediately jump into the solution and try to answer them, then you might fall into the trap where interviewer is going to lead the session. I'm not saying you have to take the complete control of the interview, but try to bend the interview for your the areas which you are strong in, and try to explain in such a way that 60 to 80% of the conversation during the interview goes in your favor. If you lose this opportunity, so that's why very important how you actually start explaining things. Okay, so be careful of that. I mean that helps a lot. It's not just a random advice. I've used it in personal, almost all the interviews, even in technical, even with client round as well. Now, let me show you how I would approach this kind of problem. So I first, realize the one component which we have to discuss is JWT. The second is the controller, where we are gonna call this JWT and validate if admin role is allowed or not. And then obviously we have to configure the middleware. So that's the basic, mental mapping which I was just talking about has got to be there. So that's exactly what I followed there. You can see the list. These are not the strict rule by any mean, obviously, but uh, to my mind, this was probably one of the best way, how I would approach. But especially those are, between 3 to 5 or 6 years of experience. For that range of experience, I think this would work very well. They should follow this. Okay, so let's start defining JWT. What the JWT actually is about. So at this stage, we are not validating anything. Okay, we are just doing mental mapping. How does the token is going to travel from Angular application? Where does validation happens in ASP.NET Core? When is HTTP context.user is going to be built? What order does middleware going to be executing in? This is architecture awareness we are just keeping in in our mind. Okay, and I'm going to create two applications, one for Angular and one for .NET, and we will see live as well, not just in theory. Because once once you see something live, you understand it deeply and you realize that okay, that's exactly what I am talking about. Because we are no longer just going to talk about it. When you see it, you realize that okay, this is the steps which we will be doing while coding as well. They won't ask you to code, but having hands-on is going to be really good. So before we go ahead and create a project and everything, the first important thing is to understand what is JWT. Okay, in simple term, JWT is a digitally signed token used for secure transmission between client and server. Those two components can be very different. It doesn't always have to be client and server. It allows you to secure communication between two components. Both can be server, both can be client, that's totally fine. But majority of the usage of JWT is within client server communication. Okay, so its key characteristic you must state immediately that it is a stateless. It contains user's identity and claim. What these two are, we will come to that. Signed to prevent tampering. Okay, how JWT actually prevent tampering is also a very important thing, and it has to be sent with the every subsequent request. It is not like you just send a request with the JWT and subsequent request you don't have to. You just simply have to send the data or request for data. No, you've got to send it to with every request, and on the server side, it will keep on validating on each subsequent request. So, in simple terms, JWT is a transport mechanism for identity, not authentication by itself. It's just a way, it's a mechanism to identify. It doesn't, do everything. Everything has to be implemented in the backend. It is just a mechanism to achieve security. JWT is not secure itself if you don't, follow few principles, which I'll come to that in the coming slides. It's just simply a mechanism for identity. Who you are, who you claim to be, and what resource you're looking for. Are you authorized or not? That's all. That's exactly what JWT is all about. The moment you have raised these points while explaining, the next obvious question you can expect, or I would strongly recommend that immediately you should also explain what does stateless means. In simple term, server will not store anything regarding any particular request from the user, from the client. As simple as that. But in order to explain in an interview, best way is stateless means the server doesn't store session data about the user between request. So let's say if you have request one where you are fetching, some data, and in subsequent request you are on fetching different components of the application. So server will not store or remember what you had asked in the previous request. Okay, there's no lookup table out there in the server side. There's no database, no server memory. Okay, it will treat each and every request as an independent one. Okay, the next follow-up question was, what is the difference between JWT and session based? If we can implement the same thing using session, why we need JWT? So in session based system, what happens is whenever a request is to be made from client to server, the server generates a session ID, and that gets stored in memory. On every request, we'll look up at the session of the last request or the request which we are basically using. The session ID which has been generated in the first request, that will be stored, and server will maintain that state. So whenever same user goes there, it will look at its session ID and realize that okay, this is the same guy who is looking for states and I have trust on him, and it will allow you to authenticate and go ahead and get the resource whichever you are looking for. But in JWT, it is slightly different. The server issues a signed token, okay, the token which I was talking about, and it is signed, which I'll come to that. The token carries identity claim. On every request, the server verifies the signature. Now let's address why stateless design is more powerful, which was his next follow-up. Through the follow-ups, I'm also giving you insights how interview tries to read your mind. So try substantiate everything which you are mentioning, especially in the when you are getting senior, and especially I have seen like when salary proportion gets higher, they want to probe too deep so that they don't end up hiring up someone who doesn't have hands-on. So try to substantiate in a way that it gives a clear signal that you are the right guy who has got internal understanding of everything what is going around. You're not just speaking out of theoretical from a book or somewhere. So let's see the advantages, and there are some trade-offs as well. There is no system in the world, either monolithic, microservices, or you name it. There is no system, no technology is ultimate, which doesn't have any trade-off or for flaws. Everything has got advantages and some trade-offs. So this is in general advice to you as well. You know, when you're talking about the advantages of something, come up with some trade-offs so that you know whenever you come up with a question like what is the difference between this and that, at that time these kind of approach will help you a lot, and that will segregate you from a junior developer from a senior developer. So let's look at the advantages. It allows horizontal scalability. What is horizontal scalability? It basically, the server doesn't store session state. Any request can be handled by any server instance. So if let's say you've got multiple server instances, then the scaling, horizontal scaling, but I'll talk about it in a separate video. Otherwise, this video is on anyways going to be very long. It will become even more. So suppose you've got multiple servers. You are basically using multiple servers. Then if none of the server is storing anything, all it does has got a key, which we'll talk about it. Any of those server can handle the request because it doesn't have a state. So we don't have to, put all the state on all the servers. Simply any server can take it and validate and give you what you want to. The request can be fulfilled by any server. No shared session storage. There is no storage headache comes into the picture. It is cloud friendly, obviously, because nothing is stored. So on cloud as well, we don't store anything. And these are the few points which makes it even more, safer as opposed to other mechanism. I'm not saying they're not safe, but these are things which makes it even more safe. And if you have some understanding about load balancer, it works very well. I personally have used it. That's why I've written it here. And this it also reduces the memory management, because if a lot of users are there, you have to remember a lot of users. But here you don't have to. All you need is to validate the signing key, which I'm going to talk about it in a bit. But token revocation is harder. You know, you cannot go ahead and remove token the way you used to in session. You have to rely on the expiration of that. So every JWT has got a expiration time, which I'll show you what JWT is made up of. And then it requires a very careful key management. Key is the key in JWT, I can tell you. Because as I was talking about, the signing key as the heart of the JWT, and you'll come to know that why I'm saying that. Okay. So statelessness definitely improves the scalability, uh, but it requires very disciplined lifecycle control, which we have to do on the backend side. So let's start exploring those things as well. This point I think I already have covered, but stateless doesn't mean that it will not have state anywhere. It is actually talking about the server, not the client. On client side, we have to store that token which we have got from the server side. Okay. So what does a JWT contain? What are the components make JWT a token? So it will have a header, which is nothing but the algorithm which we are going to use in order to create the token, and then the token type, which will be JWT, and then the payload. This is the place where a user's role, claim, expiry, issuer, audience, everything is going to be handled through the payload. And the most important part, which I've just talked about, is the signature. Because using this header and payload, we will create a signature. And that signature will remain with the server. This signature is the one who is going to validate, because the token is kind of a key, right? One key will be with client and one key is going to be with server. There are two ways we can implement the keys, symmetric and asymmetric, which we will discuss. To understand this point very carefully, that once the signature is there, this signature is the one who validates and verifies if this user is the one who should be allowed to request for that particular resource or whatever it wants to. Okay, so there will be two keys which I'll talk about. One public key, which anyone can have access to. There will be private key, which will be very important, and how it is implemented. Yeah, let's talk about it in coming up slides. This question can come up in general as well, not only in client round, even in technical round. Let's see what exactly is base64 encoding. So there are different mechanism we use. One is HS256, and there are so many. If you go to JWT website, you will see list of mechanism we can use. List of algorithm can be used for creating the token, and this value will be encoded using base64 URL. And this encoding also can be done through a lot of different ways, but base64 URL is the most common one. And that's this is what makes the safe for URLs and HTTP method, because it doesn't have any space. There's no special character which it was there, but since we have encoded it in such a way that it will be safe to pass through the URL and inside the HTTP header as well. So this can be tweaked as well. This question can come in a tweaked manner as well. That what are the different benefits of encoding to this or any other encoding manner? That actually is because it removes the space and it allows this uh, original JSON, which had algorithm and the type, can be passed through the URL and and with the HTTP headers. So let's understand how JWT signature is going to be created. So the very first thing is we the header is small JSON object which I just showed you, right? It had algorithm and the token type. Then the payload contains user ID, role, claim, expiration, which we have already seen. And in the step 3, we combine them. Okay, the encoded header with dot plus the payload. All these three things will come together, and then we will apply HMAC on top of it. So once we do that, we generate a cryptographic hash of that data using a secret key. Then will the final token will look something like the one you see out here. It will have everything required, and that signature is ready. Okay. If any byte changes, the signature will change. If any of these value, if you are going to change, then the signature will no longer going to be valid. That's how signature is protected. Now, okay. So we have just seen how we created the signature. Now, how it actually going to be verified and on? Let's understand. So user will log in, then server will generate the JWT after validating the credentials. Right? JWT will have a header and payload. This header and payload will be signed. So the JWT signature is nothing but fast version of header plus payload. Payload. Okay. This will produce the signature. Now the complete token is there. Header dot payload dot signature. You can say. Now client sends the token on every request, every API request. Client out here is going to send the request using this signature. Exactly. Then API will recompute the signature because on server side, this token can't be trusted blindly. It has got to be done properly so that we verify that this request is coming from the correct place, from the right user. Otherwise, it can be easily tempered, right? The only difference out here will be that on server side, API will recompute it using the secret key, not the public key. That's the only thing because public key is everywhere. The secret key is the one allows us to check if the public key is tempered or not. If tempered, then it will reject with 401 error. As I already said, that if something has been tempered, then API cannot trust it, right? Because currently your subject is 123, let's say, or role is admin. Subject is nothing but consider that to be an ID. Okay, the ID is 123 and role is admin. This will be anyways going to be encoded, right? Even one character change will reject the token. So that's the importance of checking the signature using the private key. Because the moment if something changes in the original JWT. So suppose this is the original JWT, something look like this. Okay, it has got header, type, payload, and the signature which we have created, uh, which basically server has created and shared the public key to everyone, and private key is with the server to validate the signature. Then attacker modifies something. Okay, anything which has been changed would be considered as change for server. Even single sentence of that JWT. You saw there's a long string, right? Even one substring, if you change or the character you change, it will get rejected. So the payload will be read, but the can't be trusted without validating the signature. If it is coming basically from the right user or not. Because as I already told you, the signing key is the heart of the JWT. If signing key is compromised, then everything is gone. Token can be forged. Uh, Attackers can access the very important data. So that's where signing key has got all the importance in JWT. Okay. Now there are two ways we sign. One is through symmetric and one is through asymmetric. It's very important to understand because this was also one of the follow-up question that how many ways we can sign a JWT. So let's understand one by one. What is symmetric key? It is the key in symmetric signing. The same key will be used to sign and validate the token. How it works is the server signs the token using a secret key. When the API receives the token, it uses the same secret key to verify it, right? Server sends the secret key using secret key. The server also has got a secret key, and API also has the secret key. And it will be encoded and decoded both using the same secret key. Now, in asymmetric signing, there is a private key for the signed token. All signed token, there will be a private key. Public key is something which is to validate and it is available for everyone, which I already talked about, right? So private key stay with the issuer, which is server. So in the safer environment, in the distributed environment, let's say, when there are multiple servers are there, multiple clients are requesting, the symmetric one becomes better because all the server will have a single key to unlock or allow a request to be processed or not. So that's where asymmetric key becomes very important in these days because most of the application these days are in a way distributed. That has got multiple server, all these things are there. But in monolithic one, you can consider this to be also equally weightage. Both of them are important, but in distributed and microservices, asymmetric key is the one which has been used very frequently and most of the time. So where are the places we can store this secret key? On server side, we can store in the environment variable, in the secure configuration. If you're using cloud, then Azure Key Vault is probably the best one. And I have recently implemented, so I can see this is really one of the best ways to do it. Then we should never hard code in the source code because source code access can be compromised. So never hard code in the source code. This has to be restricted by identity and access management policies. Okay. So that's all about secret storage. So the next thing which was asked to me was what is private key and public, sorry, where do we store private key and public key? So private key can be stored on identity and service provider. So identity provider, you can have some examples like then Auth 2.2, then Azure AD, then AWS Cognito, then Google Identity Provider. All these places we can store this private key without any issue. Now protected by these and Key Vault. Key Vault is also something where we usually keep in order to protect it, and it is something which is never shared. It will always remain with server. And public key is something which is exposed via different endpoints. It can be downloaded by API and safe to distribute because anyone who is going to request need this particular key in order to access a particular resource. So API never stores the private key. It is stored in different places, which I just spoke about. Okay. Now let's look at the complete JWT flow in real application. The user will log in, then identity provider like Okta, as I said, and others will provide a JWT. Then it will be sent to client and client will store that. And from next subsequent request, client will use this JWT for each request. And then if on API side, like our backend, the server will validate it. And if it's true, it will grant or deny the access. So this flow should be very clear while explaining in the interview. Look at the flow. So user logged in through client. It could be Angular, React, JavaScript, in JavaScript as well. Anything. Client, through the client, it will reach out to the identity provider. It will give you, after looking at the credentials, it will create a claim, then sign the token and return the JWT. Now Angular from now will use this JWT to request for a particular resource. So JWT will contain identity and claims. Claims means who I am, who I claim to be. Let's say I'm saying I'm an admin, but if that is the case or not will be validated by the backend. So those things we will now see. Okay. So after login, the user will send a request to the client or Angular app. Then on API side, we will evaluate the policy whether if it satisfy every condition, then either we will grant it or we will deny it. On API side, the most important thing which we will do through identity provider is we will validate its credentials, we'll create a claim, then sign the token, and this builds claim principle, something we call it. In the code, you will see and understand it better. Now, every request will be independently validated. Now, if you see the program.cs file, that's how we authenticate a user. Okay, the JWT bearer, which I was talking about, which comes from client, will be validated, authenticated here. And after authentication, after successful authentication, we will allow the authorization. So the middleware pipeline, the way we have configured is also gonna play a very important role. If you put this one above this, like if you authorize a user to do whatever it wants to before authenticating, things will be broken, right? So authentication has always got to be come before authorization. we first have to authenticate, then we will authorize the user to access a particular resource which it is looking for. At the end, I just spoke about the controller, which I initially talked about. This API controller will be attributed with authorized keyword, and the policy has to be admin. We've got to define it. Now, if all the validation is successful, then we are then we will allow that particular user to access this resource through the action method. Okay, and if you decorate the controller itself with this, then all the action method will be available for that particular user. Now, override with allow anonymous only when intentional. What this means is that we can allow a particular controller to be access any particular action method. At that time, we can do that. But if you want a particular resource, which is, let's say, not very secure or not very important in the security sense, then you should attribute it with this so that any user sending a request will be allowed to use this. Okay. Now, since it's a very long discussion, it has already crossed so much time. Now, few things we'll discuss, and I think it would be better if I work on the code in the next video. As of now, you have understood the theoretical part. How we actually implement in the code, we will come to that in the next video. Will make more sense because it has already, a lot of things were already discussed here. Now we can use map group extension method as well in order to achieve the same thing, right? These are this has become very important when it comes to doing it for microservices. Now these two questions can be asked like what is four at least 401 can be asked because this is the one error code we get when unauthorized, and 403 is for forbidden, but mostly 401 is the one which is implemented most of the places, right? Why is this attribute not working? Yeah, there was a question he asked me. He framed it in a different way. What he asked to me is there are a few common pitfalls we can say, which is very important in any interview. These things you can expect them to address or talk about in almost every interview, especially if you're going for a senior one. So what it does is like let's say you are authorized to be admin and your token is also valid, but your API is still returning 403. What could be the potential reason was asked to me. So what happens is the token might contain the role claim under a different name. Okay, it might say roles, or it might say role role, not roles, or it might use the long Microsoft claim type URL sort of thing. But .NET Core doesn't automatically treats all of them as one. So even though token clearly contains admin, .NET Core might not recognize it as a role. Second problem is on this here, the .NET Core checks a specific claim type by default. Okay, if you don't mention it specifically, then it will use a it will check the specific role claim by default. If the role is stored under a different claim name, the identity is created, the token is valid. But when the role check runs, it can't find the expected claim, so the policy fails there. That's why you get 403, not because authentication failed, but because the role check failed. Role check and the authentication was different, not mapped correctly. So what should we do about it? If your identity server says roles, you should also mention roles. Or if let's say identity management has used small ROLES, then you should also expect the same thing in the API. Otherwise, without any reason, it will fail. As you can already see, right? On identity server, it was used capital A, but you used small a on server side, .NET Core side. That's why it can fail. So it happens very often. Okay. So roles name should be matching with the identity server. Now, now there is one more thing which he asked me like make role check work reliably. This also can come into the discussion during the interview. What is role based and what is permission based? So what happens is in role based, we just look at the role. If it is admin, then we will allow it to be authorized. But in permission policy, along with the role, we would check if that role is permissible. If that role has got the access of permission, if that particular role is mapped to access everything we want to, right? Where we are just checking if admin or not, but here we are checking the permission for that particular role as well. So that's a very small point, but these small things you should never miss out in any interview, because this might send a wrong signal since you have explained everything very clearly. But these small things, if you miss out, it can become tricky. In the next video, whatever we have discussed in theory, we will be implementing through project. So I'll create a Angular application as well as an uh, ASP.NET Core Web API, and we will see everything in action, how it actually works behind the scene. Because explaining in theory whenever we are in an interview is important, but understanding it through creating on with our own hand is equally important. My interview experience with Deloitte, Capgemini, and so many companies are coming soon. So make sure you're already have subscribed and like the video. And please make some comments, whatever you think should be improved, or talked about, and discussed uh, in these kind of videos. Thank you very much. Keep supporting, keep subscribing, keep liking the videos. Thank you very much.